Hello everybody. Today we're going to be going over the quarterly number one review. At any point during this video, as the question pops up, I recommend you could pause and stop the video and complete the question on your own. And then when you're ready, you can go ahead and hit play and continue seeing the solution to the particular question. Okay, let's get started here. So for number one, we're taking a look at a kind of combination of fractions here. We have a numerator where we're adding two fractions, and in the denominator we're subtracting two fractions. The key idea, we want to get common denominators so we can kind of simplify the top and bottom, and then just divide to simplify what's going on here. So up top, I have 3/4 and 1/6. I can make that 9/12 and 2/12. Okay, multiplying by 3 and 3 and 2 and 2. That gives me 11/12. Okay, on the bottom, 1/2 minus 1/3, I can make that 3/6 minus 2/6. That gives me 1/6. So if we think about this large fraction, it really amounts to 11/12 divided by 1/6. And if we think about the keep, change, flip concept, or the keep, change, this will turn into 11/12 times 6/1. Which when you cross simplify, we have a 2 left over in the denominator on the left. The 6 cancels out, leaving us with 1. We multiply top times top, bottom times bottom, we get 11/2. Okay? That is not a choice, but we can write it as a mixed number. 2 goes into 11, 5 times, that's 10, leaving 1/2 left over. So we would get choice B for number 1. Okay, moving on to the next question. We have an expression here. We're going to simplify it. We want to keep PEMDAS in mind. Watch out for the negatives. Okay, so right away, inside my parentheses, I see a double sign right here. I'm adding a -7. Adding a negative is the same as subtracting. So I eliminate the negative first. Okay. Now, -4 minus 7. My answer is going to stay negative. Okay, they're both negative signs. I'm moving further to the left here, so I'm adding the 4 and 7, which would make it -11. And on the right-hand side, 6 squared is not 12, it's 6 times 6, which is 36. Now I have -11 plus 36, two different signs. The one with the larger absolute value is going to be the sign of my answer. So the 36 has a larger absolute value, meaning my answer is going to be positive. And since they're different signs, I can find their difference, which would be 25. So my answer should be positive 25 for number 2. Okay, quick note, when we're adding or subtracting integers, we want to make sure in that top example here, we saw same sign, so it stays that sign, and we add together. And then, kind of in the second half of this problem, we saw an example of two different signs. That involves absolute value and finding the difference between them. Okay, for number 3, again we have an exponent squared here. It's -7 squared. It's in parentheses, so what that really means is -7 times -7. Okay, which a negative times a negative should become a positive 49. Now -15 plus that, once again, two different signs. The one with the larger absolute value will be the sign of our answer. So the 49 has the bigger absolute value, it's positive. Our answer is going to be positive. We can eliminate choice A and C right away. And now the difference between them, 49 minus 15, will give you 34. Positive 34 for number 3. Okay, for number 4. And once again, keep in mind, as you're watching, you can pause. This way you can work out the solution yourself while you see the numbers, and then hit play if you want to see the solution unfold. Okay, number 4 is similar to number 1. We have like a combination of things going on. I'm going to add the parentheses first. So if I get a common denominator, it will become -15/24 plus 16/24. Okay, so how did I get that? I have denominators of 8 and 3. They both go into 24. 8 times 3 is 24, so I multiply the top and bottom by 3 to get the -15. And the 2/3, I have to multiply that top and bottom times 8 to get 24, which is how I get 16. Okay, now I can add the two together, keep the denominator, add the numerators. Negative 15 plus 16 is 1. Okay, divide, so I could change that to multiplication, and it's 6 over negative 5. Okay, cross canceling here. 6 goes into 24, leaving me with 4. And now top times top, I have 1 in my numerator, and 4 times 5 is 20. Don't forget there's a negative 5, so we should have a negative sign. We should get negative 1/20. Okay, keep in mind when you add, you have to get common denominators, and be careful with your signs. You don't want to make that 31 over 24. It's negative 15 plus 16, which is just going to be a 1. So keep your integer rules in mind when you're adding or subtracting fractions. Okay, an evaluation question. A common mistake here that I see is when the very first thing you see is a negative sign. Because people just kind of misuse that, if you will. I'm plugging in a negative 4. So watch what happens when I plug in a negative 4. This is where the mistake happens. Again, I'm just substituting in using parentheses. Okay, let me just highlight the mistake area. This is where I see errors. People just assume it says negative x, so they write negative 4, kind of when they simplify. But you're negating something that was already negative. So this should actually become positive 4. So be careful when you're evaluating if the first term is a negative variable. If it's negative and you negate it, it becomes positive. Okay, minus 24. And again, over here, negative 3 times negative 3 should be positive 9. Okay? Now we can PEMDAS simplify from left to right. We're going to get negative 20 plus 9. Different signs, larger absolute value is a 20, so our answer will be negative. The difference between 20 and 9 is 11. So our answer should be negative 11. Okay? Moving on to number 6. Find the difference. We have 2 decimals there. We can first figure out the sign of our answer, because that can give us kind of a 50% chance, or eliminate 50% of the choices here. We have 5, even ignoring the decimals. We have 5 and we're subtracting 12. Okay? 12 has a large absolute value. We're going to be in the negative realm of the number line. Okay? So I can flip the order of these. So I can subtract a little bit more clearly. And then just remember that my answer is negative. Put a little note, or a little negative sign like I did. And now we're subtracting decimals, far from the 2. Far here. And we get 673. And again, we made a note that it should be negative 6.73. Okay? If you try to subtract straight up, you're going to have a little difficulty there. It's easier just to figure out the sign of your answer and then subtract or find the difference between their absolute values and incorporate the sign into your answer. Don't just subtract and forget, because then you would have put choice B. Be careful with negatives. All right, number 7. You'll see something like this tomorrow. All it's asking you to do, don't be confused by the phrasing here. It just wants to know what it looks like after you correctly distribute, after you pass the donuts. Okay? So when you distribute, remember you're multiplying twice. So you're multiplying the 1/3 times the first term. And now we have a minus sign here, so not plus, but minus the second product, which is 1/3 times 5/7. Okay, be careful when we're looking at our choices here, because they all look somewhat correct, but choice D is the only one that matches. Okay, choice B is close, but that would be if there's a plus sign in the parentheses. We were distributing over subtraction. Okay, moving along here. Number 8, similar to the ones we did earlier, but now we have mixed numbers. So I'm going to convert them to improper fractions. That would be 14/3 and 21/2. Okay, and that's multiplying 4 times 3. Add 2, we get 14. And I might as well start changing some things here. 3/2, I can make 7/2. Okay, I'm going to take care of my parentheses first. Common denominator should be 6 there. So that's 28/6. And 21 times 3 is 63/6. Subtract those, I'll get negative 35/6. Okay, remember, keep the denominator 28 minus 63. It's going to be negative. Difference between 63 and 28 is 35. Times 7/2. Okay. We remember to change the multiplication sign, but 7/2 should become 2/7. Sorry about that. So we're multiplying by 2/7. I was going to say we should see some nice cross canceling. We wouldn't, but I made that mistake. Okay, 2 and 6 gives me a 3 left over here. The 7 drops out. We're left with 5 on the top. Okay, when we multiply across, we should get -5 over 3, which amounts to -1 2/3. Okay, cross canceling here, then again, 7 goes into 35 5 times, 2 goes into 6, leaving over 3. Basically, the entire right-hand fraction drops out. 5 times 1 is 5, 3 times 1 is 3, and it's negative. Careful here, because notice if we forget about this up here, we forget about that this should have been negative, our answer would have been slightly off. So always keep track of your negative signs. Sometimes they happen in the beginning or the middle of a problem. We get so hung up on finishing it that we kind of drop it off or lose it somewhere along the lines. All right, number 9, probably the most difficult type of problem that you'll see tomorrow. When we saw these, we call them like decimal fraction mixed problems. We 95% of the time we converted everybody to a decimal. We said those are more universal, you don't need common denominators, all that fun stuff. But in this case, we don't want to convert everything to a decimal. If you look at that 1/3, 1/3 is a repeating decimal. If you type it in, your calculator, if you just try to divide it, it's never going to terminate. It's 0.33333 going on forever. The same thing with the 2/3. That's 0.66666, going on forever. So we don't want to make decimals because how can we represent a decimal that never ends? So we're better off actually here converting to fractions. And this right here is going to be a little tricky. What that says, if we read that out loud, it says 375 thousandths. So that's our first clue. 375, it's in the thousandths, the tenths, the hundredths, the thousandths place. Right? So obviously that's a large fraction. We don't want to make our common denominator something, 1,000 plus, something larger than 1,000. So let's try to simplify that if we can. And right off the bat, you're not going to find the GCF of these two terms, but what I like to do, I start with numbers that I do recognize. You should recognize that 5 goes into both of these. They both either end with a 0 or a 5. Okay? If you divide that out, you'll get 75 over 200. Okay? And now you recognize again, okay, again they're both divisible by 5. If you notice in the very first step what the greatest common factor is, that's great. But I'm just showing you how you can start with smaller numbers to kind of work it along the way here. Okay, that's going to be 15. 15 over 40, which becomes 3/8 when you simplify it. Okay, and now from here, so now it's 3/8 plus 1/3 minus, and in the parentheses, the 2 and 2/3 should be 8 over 3 plus 1/4. Okay, and again, pulling out the 5 a few times and pulling out the 5 once we make it 15 over 40 is how we get the 3/8. Now it's a much smaller fraction to work with. Okay, common denominator for all these terms. So first in the parentheses, the 8 over 3 and the 1/4, we can get a common denominator of 12. So that's going to become 35 over 12. Okay, and now we can get a common denominator of 24 for everybody that's left over here. It's 35 over 12, so he becomes 70 over 24. So combining the 9 and the 8, we get 17/24 minus 70 over 24. So keep the same denominator, subtract your numerators, and you get negative 53 over 24, which we see correctly in choice B. So just to recap this problem, a lot of going on here. The 0.375, you'll see a decimal like this tomorrow as well. Write it over the 1,000. That's the 1,000th place. Divide out the 5s or any small numbers that you notice until it becomes something more manageable. Get common denominators, keep track of signs, and make sure you're adding or subtracting correctly. Okay? And one last question here. We're talking about a scuba diver swimming 24 feet below the surface. He dives 3.5 feet deeper, so we're subtracting another 3.5 feet, and then we're adding 8 3/4 of a foot. Well, you could just make that a decimal. 3/4 you can recognize as 0.75. So adding these two, we get negative 27.5 plus 8.75. These have different signs. The negative 27.5 has a greater absolute value. Our answer is going to be negative. And now we can just find the difference between the two. Okay? Bar. And you should get negative 18 3/4, so negative 18.75. So a word problem like this, you're looking out for words that either mean adding or subtracting, so kind of connecting vocabulary, and applying everything that we've used with adding and subtracting negatives. So, recapping these 10 questions, these are good practice for tomorrow's quarterly. If you want to kind of scroll backwards and try the questions now on your own, and then look at my solutions after, you can do that as well. Check out the resources on my website, the review sheet solutions. And if you have any questions, submit them in the Google form, and just make sure to fill out the Google form in the comments below so I can keep track of who watched this video. Good luck studying, and thank you guys for watching.